Hi, I'm Kate. I'm a watercolor artist and I'm going to be your tour guide through these watercolor kits. I hope you enjoy them! Alright, so let's go ahead and come back in with the rest of these eucalyptus leaves. And if you want to add maybe like a little bit more green to your mixture, maybe just a smidge of that yellow just to give us a little bit of a color variety, you can totally do that too. So let's just pick apart and start. So the reason why we need to wait for it to dry is because if wet watercolor touches another section of wet watercolor and they're different colors, the water from the one, let's say the orange section, is going to bleed into the green section. And while sometimes this is okay, especially if you're looking for that technique, a lot of loose florals like that look, you know, when it's blending into each other. For this one, it's not exactly what we're looking for. So you want to make sure that you preserve the water barrier of your watercolors. And by that, I mean keeping the different colors in their various shapes. And so the cool thing about watercolor paper is that it is going to hold your water in place. The mark of a good piece of watercolor paper, one of the many marks, is that if you are painting, you don't want the water to, first of all, seep into the paper too quickly. And second of all, you don't want the water to spread. You want it to stay right in its spot. So the mark of a good watercolor paper is when that water stays put and stays wet long enough for you to be able to kind of play with it a little bit. So for these watercolor papers, we are using a paper called Arch watercolor paper. It's spelled like arches. That's how most people say it here in the US. This is my #1 favorite watercolor paper. We're using 140-pound cold press paper, which if you're new to watercolor, that just means how thick it is the number, so how much of a ream of it would weigh. So 140 pounds is going to be thinner than, oh, I almost put it in my tea mug. 140 pounds is going to be a thinner piece of paper than 300, but most people use 140 pound. That's kind of the standard. You only need to use 300 if you're working on something fancy. Like when I used to do commissions, I would do them on the thicker paper. All right, I love how this is turning out. Yeah, and then so the cold press, that just means how the paper is prepared. So there's hot press, cold press, and then they also have a rough paper, but you just need to think of it like an iron. An iron is hot and an iron smooths out the wrinkles. So hot press would mean that the page is going to be a lot smoother. It's not going to have the tooth of the paper. Like if you look closely at your paper, you're going to see that texture. And I personally like that texture in my watercolor paintings. I find it gives a lot of personality. It allows the layers to settle in really in beautiful ways, which I'll show you as we continue along with this painting. But, so that's because it's cold press. It doesn't have that heat to iron out the tooth of the paper. The teeth of the paper? I'll have to look into the grammatical the grammatical use of that kind of tooth. So yeah, this is cold press paper. And you just remember it like an iron. Hot press is going to be smooth. Some people use hot press paper for if they're going to scan their work in. Like if you are wanting to scan your designs in, some folks use hot press paper because it's less editing in the sense that you don't have to deal with so many subtle ridges. But because I prefer the cold press so much to hot press, it makes it worthwhile to take that extra time in the editing to use the paper that I love the most. And I love that we are able to use Arches paper with this because think it's so nice to be able to use the paper that we're actually, it's important to use nice supplies, because if you don't use the good stuff, then you never know how it's going to perform. Like if you're just using construction paper or something, it's going to be really hard to enjoy the true wily ways of watercolor, because you're not getting the full effect of what it could be. But the tricky thing is that this paper can be really expensive. So that's why I really love being able to provide this watercolor paper to you at a really affordable price point, so that you can test out the good stuff and see if this is something that speaks to your heart. I hope it does. That's my ultimate goal. To get everyone hooked on watercolor. I hope you enjoyed the preview of this design from our watercolor kit. Stay tuned for the process video in super speedy mode. If it looks like fun, check out our watercolor kits with the links in the video description below to learn how you too can paint a fun design like this.